All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Access Lunchtime. I am Maria Barnes from Barnes Business Solutions. I'm your moderator of Access Lunchtime and going to be speaking today about Access Split Form. This was introduced in Access 2007. And split forms are only for the desktop Access databases. This does not apply to the web databases, although you will notice as we go through here that some parts of it are similar to some of the things that you can do in web databases. Split forms give you two views of your data at the same time. You can see both data in form view, which if you are not familiar with form view, that is the normal view, which looks something like, sorry, not this one, something like this, where you're entering records in a field or in all their fields, one record at a time, and the record takes up basically the whole page of the form. That is form view. And then you can also see at the same time in split forms data sheet view, which is more like this, where you have each record on one line. It looks a little bit like an Excel spreadsheet where the fields go across on that row, and the fields become columns on the form. That's called data sheet view. So Access split forms let you see both the form view and the data sheet view at the same time, and the views are synchronized. So if you select a field in one form, it's actually selecting the same field in the other form. To create an Access split form, you just merely need to select the table that you want to create the split form for, and then select Create, and in the More Forms here, you'll see Split Form. That creates the split form for you. I'm going to hide the property sheet so you can see it a little bit better here. And we have the form view section up here on top by default, and the data sheet part down at the bottom. And you'll notice here we have the same row highlighted down on the data sheet part as we do on the form view part. And if you select the other one, the top of the form, or the form view part of it, also changes to correspond with what you have selected in the data sheet part of the form. To change an existing form, you want to open it in Design View. To change an existing form, like if you, for instance, had the contact details, which I think is this form view. So if you already have a form that's in another type of layout, and you want to change that to be a split form, it's as simple as opening that in Design View, and then on the property sheet for the default view, changing it from single form or whatever else it is into split form type. And I'm going to go ahead and show you what that does on this. I'm not going to save it, but in this case now we have the details at the bottom and the data sheet at the top, so you can see that there's obviously going to be some different properties we can set to change the way our split form looks. But you can then, just to repeat, change an existing form that's in a different type of view to be a split form type. And I'm not going to save this just because I do not want to. I'm going to go back to my brand new form here. All right, what did I do?
Hey, Maria, can you set it up so that the individual record's at the top of the screen with the properties menu?
Yes, and I'm going to go through some of the different properties of split form. So I think I did not save the split form that I just created. So I'm creating it again here. I'm going to pull it up in Design View and look at the property sheet, and then we'll go on to what else we can change here. So if you are not in Design View, if you're in Layout View here in your split form, you can adjust the size of the data sheet by simply dragging down the separator. And for instance, in this one, I generally like the form portion of it to not be something that you have to scroll up and down on to see everything. So I like to maximize that according to whatever the size of your form is, and make the data sheet portion a little bit smaller and do the scrolling in the data sheet portion. So one thing you can do in Layout View is drag this splitter bar up and down, and then if you close out, it will save where that is horizontally on your form. And then you can also change the size of each column in the data sheet portion. So if you wanted to allow for more space, for example, for company or email address, you can drag your column dividers over to make them larger. And again, when you save this or go out of here, it will ask if you want to save, and it will save the layout that you have done. So that's something that you can change in split forms just from Layout View. And then from Design View, you can set even more properties. Here on, and all of these, I've labeled in the presentation, I've labeled the properties like, for instance, orientation, but they all start with split form, whatever the property name is. So if you're looking up and trying to find this in the property sheet, you don't want to look at orientation or data sheet. You want to look for split form orientation or split form data sheet, because that's what they're called. And they're all located on the Format area tab of the property sheet, and they're all together. So these are the ones you can do: split form size, orientation, splitter bar, data sheet, and printing. To go through each of them, the orientation shows you where you're going to be putting your data sheet, and this is what you were asking, Juan. So the default when you create it is to have the data sheet on the bottom. That's actually my preference. I like to see the form data at the top, because most of the time I think that's where you enter the information, and I like the data sheet on the bottom. But you can just as easily choose data sheet at the top, and then the data sheet shows at the top and the form is below it. Or you can also show data sheet on the left or data sheet on the right. And let me just demo data sheet on the left here for you. And you will notice, I think, a little bit of similarity with the Access web databases. This then over on the left looks a little bit like in a default view in an Access web database, where you can specify a couple fields to show as your navigation for the form. And this is a little bit different. You know, we actually do have all of the fields over here, and they're hidden, and it's only showing the first couple of them. But it looks a lot like that. And you could certainly especially if you only wanted to show a finite number. And if you had a large number of contacts, you could do it on the left or on the right if you would like. That's totally up to you and what you want to do design-wise. Then in data sheet, the split form data sheet property, that the choices there are to allow edits or read only. And what that means is, I'm going to go back here to data sheet on the bottom. If you say allow edits, that means that you can directly edit information in your data sheet. So if you're down here and you want to change the name of this to something else, that you see that changes the first name in this particular record. If instead you have this so that it is read-only, then it becomes, you can still edit things up here in the form. So you could make a change here to the form, and it would be reflected in the data sheet, but you cannot, I'm typing in here and nothing's happening, but you cannot make any changes in the data sheet view. So that's just another option. If you want the data sheet portion to be purely a search mechanism, then you might set the data sheet, split form data sheet property to read only. And I might just take this time to show you some of the search type functions that you can do with the data sheet in case you don't use data sheets frequently. But now that with Access 2007 and beyond, these data sheet filters are a lot like Excel. So if you have a small number of them, you can actually go in and you can select specific ones depending upon how many different values you get in any particular column. Sometimes this selecting individual values does not appear if it's a large number of distinct values. But you can still use things like text filters and equals or contains or begins with, and start filtering down. You can also sort each column, and see if I can find a different type. The number of filters look a little bit different than the text filters do. So you can use the different filters and stuff that way to start finding a particular record that you want. It used to be, before the split forms, it was common to have like a form header where you would put unbound text search fields in, for instance, for last name or for a phone number or something like that. And then you'd have like a search button, and it would go to either go to the first item that matched that or set a filter up on the form that had that particular. So anyway, that used to be, and there's still reasons to have search boxes and search fields that you would use on a form and not use a split form. For instance, if you have a table that's very, very large, particularly if you have like a SQL backend and you've got hundreds of thousands of records that you want to show, you probably don't want to show any data on your form to begin with. You probably want to start with blank data and have the user enter search criteria and just show the criteria which matches that search criteria, or even the top 25 or 100 results that match that, so that you're not using tons of resources if you don't need to, or in instances where you don't need to. But in cases where we're talking about smaller amounts of data, I think that the split form is a fabulous way to have essentially your search or sort criteria be a part of your form and have it be more interactive. You can still use typical Access search items. You know, you can still use the right click on the form fields itself and use the typical Access sort and filter commands that you always do. I just think it's easier to use things down in the kind of Excel-like format with the data sheets. Other properties you can use for split forms. We have split form splitter bar, and the possibilities there are yes and no, and split form position. This is save splitter bar position, sorry, and that's yes, no. And there's a little difference between that. The first property, the splitter bar property, if you say yes, then you can resize it, and if you say no, the form can't be resized and the bar is hidden. You might want to do that in some specific instances if it was important that users showed all of the fields or something like that. I really hardly ever do that. Usually let them adjust their splitter bar. And the splitter bar position is by default yes, which means that whatever you had it in last, and this is on a per user copy of the database basis, the form opens with the splitter bar in the same position that you left it last time. And, you know, I can see more reason for saying no on that. If you wanted to start out with the form being, the detail area being maximized and all showing, you might not save where it was at, but usually I leave that in its default, which is yes. There's a lot of people that have different screens. Maybe they have a great big large screen, and so their display would operate differently than someone with a smaller screen, or that was, you know, trying to use this on a small laptop or something like that. So I usually let them adjust those and save them for their own individuality and their screen size. We also have the size, split form size, which that means how tall is the detail going to be in the top or in the form view part of the split form. And that is, if the data sheet is on the bottom or the top, then that talks about the height. If it's on the left or the right, then the size is related to the width of the form. So you can set that specifically. It gets set for you when you're dragging the bar back and forth. And the default for that is auto. If I've probably dragged the splitter bar and changed it and saved, and that is why this says a specific measurement here. But if you create a brand new form, the split form size is auto, which means it just kind of tries to adjust to your screen size. And then the last property is printing, and the printing you can, when you print a split form, it can print only the top or only the form view portion of the screen, or it can print the data sheet only portion. And the default is data sheet only, the reason being that if you go to print this form, Access assumes that you prefer to have take up less printer space and less pages by having things in a more condensed format like the data sheet portion is. And so that's why that is the default. And we talked already about the power of the split forms in the filtering, the sorting, and the searching. So we covered that. Does anyone have any specific questions about split forms?
So, under what conditions have you used split forms in your projects? Why did you use them?
I've used them for several different purposes. Things like contacts of different people that belong to businesses. Things like companies. I've even used them in applications like orders. It's often nice to, for example, use a order type or a status of an order and filter on that in the data sheet part of a form, and then you can, in essence, instead of doing a report, I've provided forms with a filter already set, say on orders that are of a specific status, and the default would be to open up with orders that are in whatever important status is most important to the business. And then from that same form, all they would have to do is go into that data sheet portion and change the filter on there, and they could see all of the orders or orders in a different status, or they could add filters to that through the data sheet portion and filter on orders in a certain state or, whatever. So I find it a very powerful tool to show the client in an application a lot of different data or possibilities of types of data in one form. And then, we're talking about less design time, less coding time. The application gets built quicker, but it still has a lot of power to it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think it has huge potential with search forms where people can put in search terms and then get the results, and then they can click on the record below to either open that record above or open a new record. Because in the past, what I did was I would use a list box for my search results.
Right.
Or
and then you have to have code behind that list box. So each time you click on something else, then you move to that form or that field or that record. And with the power of split forms, you don't have to have any code behind it to do that. It automatically, operates like that for you and keeps the top and the bottom in sync. It's also very powerful if you're doing search criteria that to show you others that might be close. If you're talking about names, for example, and you do a contains, if you don't have something that's spelled exactly right, or if you've got, potentially duplicates in some kind of a database, it's easier to see them like that in a data sheet view on the bottom at the split forms, and then you can compare the different records and see exactly how they're different, or do you have a duplicate or whatever.
All right, very good.
Other questions? Does anybody have any? Go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation. It was quite informative, to the point, which is what we love about Access Lunchtime, so that we can grab lunch for the rest of the half hour. And wanted to thank you again for assuming the leadership of this group. And I'd like to remind everyone, if you do have a topic you'd like to tackle at lunchtime, please email. All right. Thank you again, Maria. If you want to, I suggest everyone subscribe to Maria's newsletter. It's quite informative. You can do that at her website, barnesbusinesssolutions.com. I'd also like to let everybody know that we have other meetings throughout the month. We have a new group starting up in Australia next month in February. We're really excited about. So if you're in that part of the woods, please consider joining us for the first meeting next February. And this was quite good, and we want to thank you once again, Maria.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.